Hello, my name is Paul Samyn. I'm the editor of the Winnipeg Free Press, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our news cafe here in the historic Exchange District. Over the past several years, we have had interviews here with Olympians, astronauts, comedians, rock stars, cabinet ministers, both provincially and federally, premiers, a former prime minister, but never before a sitting Prime Minister. So I'm delighted to have sitting next to me the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. Justin, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Paul. I want to start by saying that it's great to be back here. I was here a few years ago, and one of the promises I made, and it's great when a politician can keep promises, was to come back, and I'm glad to be here because these kinds of forums, of exchanges, of frank conversations are essential for democracy to stay helpful and healthy, to make sure that we get to exchange and hear from people who have concrete concerns. And I really want to congratulate the Winnipeg Free Press for having this cafe, for using it the way you do, and for continuing to be a strong and independent voice for your community.
Well, I appreciate that. You do know that newspapers are looking for tax changes and more spending, but we could talk about that later. But
you know
this
what?
Is a good start.
I think I'm helping out the newspaper by just being here today. How's that?
All right, we'll let it go at that. Okay, we've got about 30 minutes here. We're going to talk about a wide range of issues, some national, some more local, and we're going to pay some particular attention to an issue that's on your radar screen, and it's also critically important to the future of our city and the province, and that, of course, is the Aboriginal file. Joining us today as part of that are some students from Children of the Earth School. They're among the first.
Congratulations on 25 years. That's a big deal, yeah.
So these students they're marking their 25th anniversary of school on Friday. So they're going to be watching, they're going to be listening, and then they're going to be asking some questions. Okay, so we're going to get going. First question, I promise I'm not trying to get you into trouble with your wife. I think you do that enough on your own. Anyways, which honeymoon has lasted longer? The one when Sophie said yes to you at the altar, or the one that you and your government have been enjoying, which will be marking its 7th month anniversary on Saturday?
Well, listen, 7 months is a long time to be able to talk about a honeymoon. I mean, our honeymoon lasted a few weeks, and it was great on that level with Sophie. But I think one of the things that was very clear that Canadians were asking for in the past election wasn't so much around a specific. Well, actually, there was a lot of policies they were asking for and about, but the biggest thing I heard from people was asking about tone, asking about approach, being the kind of government that listened, that engaged with people, that focused on evidence and data as needing to be the underlying foundations of policy as opposed to ideology or political perspectives. And I think that's one of the reasons why Canadians are open to what we're doing. I mean, we still have an awful lot of work to do, but I think our approach has been very much about living up to the expectations Canadians have about what they wanted a government to look like, and so far so good.
So it's clear that in October Canadians voted for change, and it's clear that you're a different Prime Minister than Stephen Harper. But the differences between the 22nd Prime Minister and the 23rd Prime Minister, how are those differences making a difference in the lives of everyday Canadians?
Quite simply, one of the things that was at the heart of Mr. Harper's economic policy was an idea that if you give tax breaks and advantages to the wealthiest Canadians, they will go around creating jobs and profits that will benefit all of society. That's trickle-down economics, and it has never worked, and it didn't work for the past 10 years. Giving tax breaks to the wealthiest does not help. So one of the foundational things that we did that was very different, very first bill we put forward in the House of Commons, was to lower taxes for the middle class by asking wealthiest Canadians to pay a little more in taxes. And that kicked in as of January 1st. So middle class Canadians have a little more money on their paychecks than they had before. The second big difference that we're going to be bringing in as of July are the Canada Child Benefit, which is a monthly child benefit check that doesn't go to the wealthiest families and goes instead to larger amounts to low-income families and middle-class families, because that's where we need to be investing if you want to grow the economy. When the middle class has money to invest, to grow the economy, when people have an opportunity to join the middle class with good education, with financial support, with a proper process, and a government that is concerned with their well-being, we create an economy in which everyone can succeed and everyone does well. I mean, when a lot more people have more money in their pockets to spend, to invest, to grow the economy, I'm not worried about business owners and wealthy corporations, because they will benefit from people having more money to spend and more money to grow. That's how you create a strong economy from the middle class outwards.
Okay, so those are clear differences, but I'm going to talk about something I think that people thought would change and that we haven't necessarily seen, and that's some of the stuff that's been happening in Parliament. Across the street, is a boxing club, okay? Now, I'm not going to use that to talk about the fisticuffs nearly sparked in the House of Commons a few weeks back, but rather to talk about the majority muscle and how it's been used on time allocation, how it's been used in some of the things that have been happening in committees as it relates to electoral reform, as it relates to C-14, the assisted death legislation, and as well the changes to the Air Canada Act. Those were things that you and the Liberals railed about when the Conservatives did it. Why are you doing much of the same?
Actually, we're not. We got elected on a platform to get things done for Canadians. And among other things, the Supreme Court tasked the Parliament of Canada to bring forward a framework for assisted dying, which is one of the things that you mentioned, medical assistance in dying. The previous government did absolutely nothing on that for 10 months. And then when we came into power, we had 2 months to get it done. We turned to the Supreme Court. We said, could we get a little more time to be able to listen to Canadians, to work on this important issue? And the Supreme Court said, okay, we'll give you 4 more months. It's about to run out in June 6th. Canadians expect that we have a process that actually allows Canadians who are seeking death with dignity to get the kind of medical help that they need, while at the same time Canadians expect government to protect our most vulnerable. And getting that balance right is extremely important. Now, we are very much hopeful that we're going to hit that June 6th deadline because lacking a framework, Canadians are at risk. So, we put forward a clear series of proposals, of processes. We worked to listen to Canadians. There are folks to our left who don't think the bill goes far enough, that we should be more permissive in terms of medical assistance in dying. There are folks to our right who thinks the bill goes too far and we should be less permissive on medical assistance in dying. And both of those parties are trying to slow down the process. A great example is the Conservatives had the same people get up over and over again to try and drag out the clock. Well, we're very aware that we have a deadline of June 6th that we have to try and hit. We've just sent the bill to the Senate. We're hopeful that the Senate's going to do it responsibly but do it quickly so that we can actually make sure that Canadians are being protected. But Canadians have very little patience for the kinds of partisan games that unfortunately opposition parties have used from time to time. Now, this is not to say that we have been without our challenges, and that's why one of the things that we did just today was announce that on electoral reform, which we've always said is extremely important to listen to Canadians and to involve all parliamentarians, we've agreed with opposition parties that, fine, maybe Liberals shouldn't have a majority on the Electoral Reform Committee, and we've actually, even though we have with a majority in Parliament, the right to be a majority on that committee, we said, you know what? Let's give the majority to opposition members so we can have a quality discussion about how to improve our electoral system. Those are the kinds of things that Canadians expect us to do, and that's exactly what we're doing.
That's fine. There was a Supreme Court timeline that was set on that one. But C-10, there seems to be no reason to rush. And my question for you is, for maintenance workers here in Manitoba who were hopeful that they could get those high-paying jobs back. They're watching this thing steamroll ahead. The Manitoba government doesn't want it moving ahead. The Quebec government doesn't want it moving ahead. And they're worried that what's happening here is something that, again, is going to favor Quebec and Quebec interests over those of Manitobans. So why does that move as quickly as it's moving?
Well, again, this idea that there is an unlimited amount of time to pass legislation in the House is simply not true. Now, the opposition parties certainly have no interest in us passing even legislation that they wholly agree with, because government getting things done that people approve of is difficult for an opposition to run against in the next election. But the fact of the matter is, we have studied. The aerospace industry is extremely important for us, and we were able to secure a return of 150 high-paying jobs to here in Manitoba in the aerospace sector. Now, a number of years ago, you lost over 400 jobs in that sector, and that's something we're definitely working forward to getting back. 150 new jobs is a good step in the right direction, but you're right, it's not enough. And that's why we continue to work with the aerospace industry, with companies like Air Canada on one side, Bombardier on others, to try and encourage investments here in the kinds of high-quality jobs that Manitobans and Winnipeggers have demonstrated time and time again they're more than capable and competitive in terms of filling. And we're going to continue working on that. But there aren't any overnight quick successes or quick fixes. It's strong, meaningful work, and on that, we've been very closely engaged with the Manitoban government, with our Manitoba MPs, and we're moving in the right direction.
Last week when you were in Winnipeg, you asked your party to give thanks to Stephen Harper for his service to Canadians. Now, some members of your party, Bob Ray, found that a little hard to stomach, but it was something that we haven't really seen in Canada that often. And I'm wondering, is that an effort on your part to not become as polarizing a figure as Stephen Harper was as Prime Minister, and for that matter, as polarizing a figure as your father was when he was Prime Minister?
I think very few people understand as well as I do the impact that being Prime Minister or holding public office can have on one's family. I grew up in it, and now I'm subjecting my kids to that. I know, tonight, when Xavier gets home from his karate class in about an hour, I won't be there to see whether he's got another band on his belt or not. So these are things that my family has to give up so that I can do the job that I do. And regardless of what you think of someone's policies, I think it's very Canadian that we do have a level of respect for the work and the office that people hold. Stephen Harper won the 2011 elections, and he got to serve as Prime Minister as he won a number of elections, and we have to respect the office he held and the work he put into it, regardless of what you think of his exact policies. And certainly reaching out to his family was also something that I think is very important and very true to who we are as citizens and as a people. So I'm surprised that people made such a big deal out of it. For me, with Mr. Harper indicating that he's probably leaving Parliament over the summer, we should recognize people who have served their country, whether or not you agree with them. And heaven knows I disagree with him on an awful lot of things, but I still thank him for his service. Okay.
You're standing tall on the national stage right now, but there is one politician you need to look up to, and I think you're going to meet him tomorrow. That, of course, is Brian Pallister, Manitoba's new Premier. What do you hope to accomplish in that first meeting and then going forward with the new Premier?
Well, I think one of the things that I've been very, very clear on from the beginning is how important it is to work collaboratively with other levels of government. That's actually why I'm here in town right now, because we have the Federation of Canadian Municipalities coming together. And this will be my 4th straight year meeting with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, because our mayors right across the country are really important for getting the kinds of quality of life, the infrastructure, the economies moving right across the country. And I look forward to meeting with your other Brian Bauman, tomorrow, who I know well and met a number of times, to talk about the infrastructure investments we're going to make. On the provincial scene, I've always been very clear as well. I believe in working collaboratively, and I have had one conversation with Premier Pallister the day after he got elected to congratulate him, to talk about how much I look forward to working with him, and he certainly reciprocated that sentiment, and I look forward to sitting down and talking about issues that matter to us, that is the growth of the economy for Manitoba, making sure we're investing in the kinds of infrastructure that are going to help people get to school, get to work, have reliable housing and a strong future. But also, I know he's made a real priority of Indigenous issues, and that certainly is one that's really important for me. So we may have things that we disagree on. I can guarantee you we will disagree on them respectfully. But I also know there'll be many things that we do agree on, and I can guarantee you we will work collaboratively on those.
Turn the topic to marijuana. It's fair to say that the planned legalization of marijuana has created a cloud of controversy across this country. A number of pot dispensaries have popped up, and the application of the law is extremely uneven depending on the city and the province. What responsibility does your government take for that confusion, and how can you clear that out?
I've been very, very clear from the very beginning on this. The first times I've ever talked about our platform to legalize marijuana and not decriminalize marijuana. And there's a big difference between the two, and I am in favor of legalization, and I am not in favor of decriminalization alone, which is a position that the NDP and now apparently the Conservatives are taking. And I'll make it very clear, because there are two things that convinced me that legalization of marijuana, of changing our marijuana regime, are necessary. One of them is because right now, underage Canadians have incredibly easy access to marijuana. In a UN study of 29 different developed and advanced developing countries, the number one country for underage access to marijuana in the world was Canada. It's easier for our kids to get their hands on pot than anything else. And you can talk about how marijuana may be less harmful than alcohol or cigarettes in some ways, and there's studies to prove that, but there is no question that the developing brain, underage Canadians, are more vulnerable to the harmful effects of marijuana. So my approach is to say, if we legalize marijuana, if we start controlling points of sale, the demand to show proper ID, the same way we do for alcohol and even cigarettes, will make it more difficult than it is right now for young people to get access to marijuana. And the second thing is that our current system provides billions upon billions of dollars of revenue to criminal organizations, street gangs, and gun runners. It's a massive source of revenue for violence in our streets. So legalizing, getting the point of sale out of the hands of criminals, controlling who we sell it to, will make our system safer for Canadians. Decriminalization does nothing to control the age of who's buying it or who actually gets to make money from selling it. And that's what I have talked about from the beginning. So until we bring in a legalized regime, the current laws on marijuana apply and should be applied. The fact that we are going to make changes to remove the money from criminal organizations and protect our kids needs to be done properly and can't be done randomly or organically the way people are trying to get it done now.
Okay, so on the points of sale, where do you want to go buy your legal marijuana? Shoppers Drug Mart or a Crown-owned agency?
Well, the fact is, in Canada, the federal government doesn't necessarily decide that on its own. Liquor control is done by the provinces, and we have provinces like Quebec that do it very differently than other places, than Ontario does, for example, or even Manitoba. So it'll be up to the federal government to create a framework, to work with the provinces, to figure out what exactly is going to work for different jurisdictions across the country. That's the only responsible way to go about doing this. And like we've said from the very beginning, we're going to do this responsibly.
Okay. One last cannabis query. You admitted smoking pot when it was illegal as an MP. When it's legalized, will you smoke it as a Prime Minister?
I don't think so. As I've said many times, I am not someone who has a history of using drugs. I lived in Whistler for a few years and was certainly surrounded with a lot of friends who did, but it was just never my thing. I don't drink very much. I don't smoke. I never have. I don't even drink coffee because I don't like the jolt that caffeine gives me. And when I told people I don't drink coffee, it made far more of an uproar than I did when I told people I had once smoked a cigarette, once smoked a joint. So the fact is, it's my choice that I not do that. And you know, we should respect adults' choices to make their own decisions.
Okay. I want to talk about the Aboriginal issues. You've talked about a new relationship with Canada's First Nations, but in talking about that, you've also
They're not Canada's First Nations.
Okay.
They're First
Fair
Nations.
enough.
They're Indigenous peoples.
You've also though raised expectations.
Yeah,
Thank you. I invited you guys too. Come on. You've raised expectations, and I guess the question for you is, have you raised expectations beyond what Canada has the fiscal capacity to deal with, and to deal with in a time frame that is going to ensure that those that are listening and hoping and praying those promises come true, what happens when they don't?
Well, we put forward, I mean, a lot of people have talked about the Kelowna Accord that was signed by the previous Liberal government in 2005, and that represented a $5 billion investment that got cancelled as soon as the government changed in 2006, and represents 10 lost years of investments that were not made in infrastructure, in schools, in social services, in housing, in water treatment, in all sorts of things. And those are 10 years we can't get back. But in our budget that we just put forward, we put in $8.6 billion over the coming years into Indigenous issues, everything from education to water to housing to a broad range of infrastructure so that we could renew the relationship. And one of the things I've always said, and I think one of the things people know on this, is there is no quick fix. It's not going to be suddenly, okay, we can invest money today and tomorrow or next week or 1 year from now, everything will be great. I think we understand that the challenges we're facing were created largely by Canada and the Canadian government over decades and indeed centuries, and are going to take years to turn around. But I do know, and I feel this every time I have a conversation with any Indigenous person right across the country, that there is a tremendous opportunity to start meaningfully down the path of getting it right. And that means moving towards parity so that Indigenous students have the same kind of funding in their schools as non-Indigenous Canadians across the country. That access to health care is even right across the country in Indigenous communities and not. That we start dealing with the boil water advisories that make Canada seem like a third world developing country instead of the advanced economy that it is. There are so many things we have to get right as building blocks for fixing a relationship that, yes, we have to move forward on. Yes, we have to move forward meaningfully on, but it's a challenge that will outlive my time as Prime Minister, no matter how successful I am over the coming years. This is one that Canada needs to engage in, and the one thing that inspires me and reassures me more than just about anything else is actually talking to young Indigenous individuals and leaders such as yourselves here today from the Earth, the Children of the Earth High School, that you are part of the solution, and you have been waiting individually and collectively a long time for a government that was willing to say, let us be partners the way our ancestors committed to. Let us share the responsibilities we have here. Let us walk forward together. Let us build opportunities and success for everyone who shares this extraordinary land. And that, unfortunately, has not been adequately said or built up over the past years. And that's something that we're getting started on.
Okay. Now that's your cue, because now we're going to turn to the students from Children of the Earth. They've prepared some questions, and it's interesting, these questions are being asked. We're actually marking the one-year anniversary of the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I think they've got some questions here. Sarah's got the microphone, and we're looking here to... Who's starting? So if you want to stand up, introduce yourself, and then you put your question to the Prime Minister.
Okay. My name is Charlene Anderson. I go to Children of the Earth. Mr. Prime Minister, I have a two-part question for you. First part is, in respect to your position on the Canadian economy and the pipeline projects, how do you plan to move forward with XL, considering that President Obama rejected pipes? Also, do you believe that growing the economy by transporting oil through pipelines can go together without compromising the environment?
Well, that's a great question, Charlene. Two great questions. One, President Obama, as I've said many times for a number of years, one of the fundamental responsibilities of any Canadian government, and this is historical, this isn't just now, is getting our resources to market. We're a country with vast natural resources, and we have always had more resources than we've had people to properly benefit from them, so we're always going to rely on trade with the United States, with Europe, with Asia. The issue is, in the 21st century, getting those resources to market needs to happen responsibly. And that means making sure we have the support of communities affected by it, making sure we're doing it in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and making sure that it's respecting the science that we know needs to protect future generations. And that's where we are overhauling the process so we can actually have the public trust that Mr. Harper was unable to achieve on energy projects over the past years. So any Canadian I talk to understands that, yes, we need to have jobs and growth. We need to have opportunities for our young people to be able to work and succeed. But at the same time, we need to protect our natural environment. We need to protect the world and the atmosphere from the increasing impacts of climate change. So what people expect us to do is to do those two things together. Not to say it's a choice between environment or economy, but know that we can only build a strong economy if we are at the same time protecting the environment. Now, what does that mean? In the short term, it means recognizing that the world runs on fossil fuels still. We're increasing renewable energies, we're increasing innovation, but there is going to be a time during which fossil fuels will still be relied on. Now, can we play a role in helping us move beyond those fossil fuels by investing in renewables, by looking at the kinds of innovation we need to get off fossil fuels? Yes, we need to. But B, while we are still stuck using fossil fuels, can we do a better job of extracting them responsibly so we're not endangering the planet, doing it better than anyone else in the world so that we have a lower impact and we actually create the innovative solutions that the world is looking for on how to not damage the planet as we continue with our economic activities. Canada has a role to play on that, and that is the lens that I'm coming to on all these projects. We know we need to continue to develop our resources, but we also know we have to do it in a better, more responsible way in proper partnership. And that is how we're looking at various pipeline proposals that come forward, various opportunities to invest in energy generating projects, to make sure that we are on a sustainable path that is going to both create jobs for our kids, but opportunities for our grandkids and great-grandkids to live in a healthy, unpolluted world. And getting that balance right is, quite frankly, one of the big, tough issues that Canadians elected me Prime Minister to do. Thank you, Charlene.
And we got, last question is, Jackie, over here.
Hello, my name's Christine. Making the youth suicide crisis in Indigenous communities a top priority is a great first step, but creating a national prevention strategy takes time. We noticed your plan to meet with the chief of Attawapiskat in Ontario. How can you help youth currently in crisis in Pamichacanak in Manitoba?
Thank you very much for your question. Obviously, suicide prevention and suicide in general is a huge issue for Indigenous communities right across the country, as it is for all of us who see the news coming out of Attawapiskat and elsewhere with tremendous concern. A couple of months ago, I went to visit Shoal Lake, actually, and got to meet with a number of young people who were quite vocal about what their challenges were and where the path to solutions were. And yes, on Monday, I'm going to be meeting with the chief of Attawapiskat, but just as important for me, I'm also going to be meeting with young people from Attawapiskat, because, quite frankly, when our Indigenous Affairs Minister, Carolyn Bennett, went up to Attawapiskat a little while ago, she spent a lot of time talking to the young people and saying, okay, so what is it that you need? Where is this challenge coming from? And the kinds of things that came forward were very different than what the chief actually had to say about what Attawapiskat needed. The young people were talking about, well, can we get courses that'll help reconnect us with the land? We don't know how to hunt or fish anymore. Can you help us with sort of survival knowledge that our elders used to know but got wiped away with residential schools, so our parents weren't able to teach us that? Can you help us take pride once again in our language and in our culture? One of the things that's amazing for me to see is we know that there's a youth suicide crisis within Indigenous communities across this country, much higher rates than non-Indigenous communities. But if you go look at communities that have a great system for teaching Indigenous languages and culture, in those communities, the suicide rate is way lower than in other communities that don't have that, because so much of the despair and hopelessness and lack of opportunity for the future comes from not feeling good about who you are and where you are. And one of the things that touches me deeply is every time I go to a school, an Indigenous school anywhere across the country, I'm welcomed with drumming, with singing, with smudging ceremonies, and with a celebration of culture that I see a lot of people just taking for granted, as this is part of what we do and how we celebrate. But to think that 30 years ago, 50 years ago, the federal government worked very hard to try and eliminate drumming, languages, songs, culture from Indigenous peoples. It's so damaging, as we saw from the TRC report, that we allowed that to happen for far too long. And working slowly and carefully to rebuild opportunities and pathways to success, that yes, a lot of it's internal in terms of taking pride in who you are and how valuable your culture is to everyone else who lives in this land. I mean, as we start to think about how we build economies that go from short-term success towards understanding long-term success, drawing on the people who've lived on this land for millennia is a very good philosophy to listen to. But more than that, how we look at creating the opportunities, the jobs, the education, the infrastructure, the housing, the social support, the pathways to success that are so essential for Indigenous Canadians to participate fully in our national success is pressing. I mean, when we look at the population of this country, the highest percentage of young people are in Indigenous communities. So investing in First Nations education, investing in Indigenous opportunities isn't just about the future of Indigenous communities. It's about the future of Canada. And that's why this is such a big, important issue for me.
I'm going to thank... We had the applause meter going. That's good. Anyway, sorry. Okay.
Actually, if we have time for one more question, I'll take it.
We got one last bonus question. Here we go.
Bonus question. That's very good. First of all, I do call myself a feminist and do so regularly, and that's really important because we need people to understand that being a feminist is understanding that the opportunities and the equality of women are simply not there yet, and we still have an awful lot of work to do. And there is work to do. And it's not something that's going to happen easily. And Canada does a lot of wonderful things, but whether it comes to violence against women, and a good example is the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry that we're in the process of launching right now, or a gender parity cabinet as a strong symbol of equality. These are things that we're working on, that we're moving forward, but we're still way under in pay equity. So there is still a lot of work to do. Now, on the international side, one of the things that we know is that Canada, as I've said, is a trading nation, needs to be able to engage around the world. And it's essential that when a Canadian government signs a contract with another country or a company, that people don't feel that as soon as there's an election, that contract might be ripped up. The previous government signed a contract, and we have to respect that contract. And I understand that people have concerns about Saudi Arabia. I have concerns about Saudi Arabia, and that's why we have committed that moving forward, now that we've formed government, we are going to apply a level of openness, transparency, and rigor in imposing the rules that Canadians expect us to, because that, quite frankly, is what people expect of this government, and one of the reasons they tired of the last government. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very much.
Anyways, I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank especially the students from Children of the Earth School, Miigwech. I hope you have a great 25th anniversary on Friday. And I want to thank Prime Minister. Thank you for keeping your promise to return to the Winnipeg Free Press News Café. Thank you very much.
I look forward to my next visit. Thank you all. Merci.